Salutations everyone, this is Razor bringing you guys another Overwatch video today talking about Widowmaker, a very important character in the meta right now. We saw a lot of Widow in the World Cup and in the preseason of the Overwatch League. And, you know, we saw Flower and Taimu and a bunch of people doing their best with Widow to make a huge impact and counter the Mercy meta best they could with her burst damage ability that is unparalleled. In a consistent basis. You don't have to worry about cooldowns or anything. One-shot headshots on squishies, taking care of Mercies and Pharahs, Tracers coming at you, ulting Genjis or visoring soldiers. Widow has the power to kind of counter everything in a sense. You can get behind a Bastion who's riding on the cart, 2 pop shots right in his little blue box of victory. If he ain't getting healed, then that's a dead Bastion, and you could just steamroll from there once their main source of damage is gone. Widow is really good at taking the first points of Anubis as well as Hanamura, which we saw exemplified quite a lot at Pro Play recently, and just being able to see Widow's kind of carry a team fight, start the initiation with a real quick pick, being able to either take out the Mercy early, which is of course very key here in the Mercy meta that we still live in, as well as if you're not killing the Mercy, you're forcing her tempo res out early, so then you can go in without res, hopefully, taking out maybe a squishy so that she wastes the res on a squishy, so then you can take out a tank or something like that. Widow can kind of play around a lot of comps. She, of course, is very map dependent, one of the hardest characters in the game to use. I'm not going to be hitting 80% of my shots here. I think I only hit 54, but that's pretty much what you should expect out of your Widows. If you're not hitting half of your shots with Widowmaker, you're probably not getting the best out of the DPS slot. But it is very situational. She's not going to be able to do great against shields with the likes of Reinhardt and Orisa, especially if they're running both of those. And if they try to counter you very hard with Genjis and Tracers trying to get into the back line, Genjis can really easily get up to the high ground that a Widow might be perched at. And without proper use of her hook shot, it's going to be difficult to get away from him for the amount of time needed for your teammates to peel for you or to, just prolong the fight. Widow can also be a great Trojan horse. You don't have to be just a super high impact, super accurate, headshot only, 360 no scoping Widowmaker in order to be effective within the game. Obviously, you want to get the most value out of Widow by hitting the shots, nailing the Mercies, just getting the attention off of your team might be all that you need, and that you can definitely, not something that you really see on paper, but if you take a look back out of VOD, and if you could hear what the enemy team might have been saying, it's we need to get rid of that Widow, even if she's not making high impact, saying she's getting maybe 3 kills in the first minute. That can change what the enemy team is trying to do with their defense or with their offense, depending on when and where you're using Widow. Obviously, she isn't applicable in the majority of situations, I would say, especially since in order to maximize Widow's impact on a team, the rest of the team has to be doing their job. She's not a carry hero. Like Mercy can just heal everything in the world, or a Genji just getting Dragon Blades every few seconds, or a Pharmercy can kind of just really hold out on their own in team fights. Widow can get a pick by herself, sure, but you're not going to be able to get the communication and coordination to consistently go in and win those team fights when the win situation, when the win criteria has been moved because of Widow's presence within the game. So what Widowmaker can do outside of just being a killing machine is changing what the enemy team has to do, completely controlling the high grounds to where, all right, we're going to need to move the Pharah on this. Widow is really good against Pharah, but some people really want to challenge that. Some people will try to go in with, you know, try to put too much resources into stopping the Widow, throwing a Winston and a Genji at the Widow, and then just to get you in the back line while the rest of their team is getting held at the choke for way too long. And that, you know, ruins the amount of time that they may have for a number of pushes, or, you know, it'll force overtime or something like that. So Widow Widow's ability to stay alive and be kind of a thorn in their backside can be just as valuable as being a killer Flower-esque Widowmaker out there. So you don't have to be the best shot in the world in order to get a lot of value out of Widow. Obviously, if you are not getting kills with Widow, if you are not winning those long-range duels, if you are not picking off their squishies, their healers in the backline, if you're not getting those headshots on Roadhog to force him to take a breather, or getting behind the Orisa or the Bastion to create pressure on them to force the different angles of attack that they have to look for, then Widow might as well not be in the game at all. There's a lot of different ways that she can impact the team fight, but if she's not doing any of those properly and the rest of your team kind of can't play around that, then you're much better off choosing, you know, Reaper or Mei, or, you know, pretty much any other character whose impact is kind of easier to coordinate with a team without, you know, a ton of communication. But if Widow is used properly within the synergy of a team in a team fight, there's a lot of things that she can do. And in matchmaking, even more so. Like I mentioned, she doesn't have to get a ton of kills, but maybe she just picks off the same person 3 times before they can get the first objective, whatever that may be on Dorado or Anubis or what have you. It could force a switch, you know, force them off of Zenyatta, or force them off the Mercy, possibly. You know, that's not as likely because, you know, Mercy players are used to dying a lot and not getting a ton of kills. But if you can change the approach that they make, or the character selection that they make, that might throw the fight in your favor just a little bit, even more so. Another thing that you often see if you play Widow is that when you start going ham on Widow, someone on the enemy team gets triggered and they're like, I'm gonna go to Widow and I'm gonna duel them, which presents the enemy team a couple of problems. They're losing the player that was within a role that, you know, had previously been established, and they're changing that role to a long-range battle. They're changing an entire character's resources into fighting one other character. And thirdly, if you're making somebody switch because of your Widowmaker play, chances are you're a better Widow than they are. Also, they're going to be tilted. You know, Widowmaker is one of those characters that can very, very easily tilt somebody because she's, you know, she can get a one-shot headshot kill on a couple of characters within the game. So that can be frustrating if it happens, you know, 2 or 3 times, even within the first 5 minutes, just because it's so quick. So people can get really triggered, they can get tilted very easily and get thrown off their game. And if somebody, you know, decides that they're going to focus all their attention on revenge and killing that enemy Widow that is you, that can throw off their whole team. That can throw off the amount of damage input that they can. If they were struggling with your tanks before, that's going to be even further as a problem if they have a Widow just trying to duel your Widow in the backline. So that definitely throws a lot of people off, throws off a lot of teams. And if you're a Widow player yourself, you know what the lines of sights there are going to be. You're probably going to be better with your hooks and your hook shots as well. You know where to place your Venom Mines to catch those flanking positions. Then you can get the call outs and have your team dive on them, or send your friendly Tracer or Genji or Winston on them real quick, and then all of a sudden they aren't getting that value that they could be having on another character. So we know Widow is very good against the Mercy meta. You know, a lot of people were thinking that the new Mercy rework was completely going to remove Widow from the conversation, because anything that Widow can kill very quickly, Mercy can just instantly res. Well, that definitely burns her res quicker than, you know, slowly chipping away with a Pharah or a Soldier. And it doesn't require as much of a commitment as a Genji or a Tracer going in there into the back line. And the enemy at the lower levels of play, you know, Diamond and below, they aren't going to be used to Widows. You know, Widows don't really start getting good until, you know, Diamond at the earliest. And even then, they're not going to be, of course, applicable in as many situations as, you know, those master Widow players out there. They're not going to be as accurate, and they're going to be much more easily tilted. So all that together makes Widow a force to be reckoned with at all levels, if the communication is good enough and if your skill shot with Widow is good enough. Like I said, if you're missing a ton of your shots and not getting any value out of Widow, it's basically a 5v6 because there's nothing else that she can do other than getting picks, other than taking out those squishies very, very quickly, hitting a headshot on Zarya to force the bubble, or hitting the Bastion in the blue box to make him all of a sudden an easy kill target. It's just a hook combo away, or 2 Pharah shots away, or a Helix rocket away from being eliminated from that otherwise possibly heavily fortified position that a Bastion might have been in, or forcing Winston bubbles when they don't want to, or, like I said, making a lot of resources being thrown at one character, which allows your team a lot more breathing room. It's definitely a give and take with Widow. If you're really good with Widow, it buys your team a lot of space. And if your team is really good at pushing the cart, pushing the objective, keeping their tanks alive, and getting a lot of attention, then that buys you as a Widowmaker a lot of space to line up those headshots, get those squishies, get the right angle of attack, maybe get a couple of you know, good hooking positions for just a quick little chunk damage here and there. So Widow is definitely a very, very hard character to get a lot of value out of because of the win conditions when it comes to using a Widow. But if the shot is on, the coordination is somewhat there, you have the right tanks and the right healers looking out for each other, you may not need anything more than a Widow picking people off from a long distance to get them tilted, to get them to completely change their plan of attack and completely take over any sort of composition that the enemy team might throw at you. So Widow is big in the meta right now, definitely still the hardest character in the game to use because of hitting those shots, but even if you're not great, you can still absolutely swing a game.